Hey y'all, welcome to Paige's Perspective, where I help you find your inner strength to cope with life. Let's talk about the power of change and choices. How many times have you said to yourself, I messed up, I'll never change, I'm not capable, I'm just going to throw in the towel? Maybe it was after snapping at your kids. Maybe it was giving into a craving when you were working on healthier choices. Maybe it was when you spiraled into a panic and felt as though you're just doomed to be this way forever. Maybe it was as simple as sleeping through an alarm when you've told yourself over and over again you're going to wake up early to get some movement in. Maybe it was when you felt as though you wasted a whole day scrolling instead of doing something productive. I've been there. I used to really struggle with feeling like I've screwed up. So what's the point in trying again? Matt used to have this saying, can't win, don't try. And it's total BS. And it can have us feeling stuck and spiraling for a really long period of time. Or we catch ourselves in the same pattern of going super hard, feeling extra positive, and then going too soft and crashing. There isn't balance there. So I would feel massive shame during these times. It felt like my story is already written for me, and I didn't know if I was capable of changing it because it felt like I was proving to myself that I was a failure over and over and over again. But what I've come to learn and what I'd love to teach others is that one bad choice doesn't define you. It's what you do with that choice. Those moments don't define your future. It doesn't mean you're destined to stay the same forever. You know, a huge empowering piece for me was realizing that I have the power to choose what I do next, and that choice is what will help me build my future self, even if it's small. I want to get nerdy for a second. So our brains are wired for change. Neuroscience calls this neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to form new connections and strengthen them over time. So think about going on a hike. The first time you walk a new trail, it's hard, the ground is uneven, the brush is thick, it feels uncomfortable. But if you keep walking it over time, it becomes a clearer path. That's what your brain does with new habits. Think about your relationship dynamics. Maybe second guessing yourself every time your partner twists the truth. It might look like retreating into silence when tension rises because that's what kept the peace before. It might look like overfunctioning, covering for their mistakes, cleaning up the mess, smoothing things over so no one notices what's really going on. But here's the catch. Every time you choose a new response, like writing down what actually happened instead of doubting yourself, or calmly leaving the room instead of walking on eggshells, you're stepping into a new path. The first few times it feels strange and uncomfortable, but every time you do it, the weeds get trampled a little more. The path gets clearer, and eventually it becomes easier than the old path. That's what happens in your brain when you choose again, when you make choices, when you change your reactions, your responses, your habits. Not one choice doesn't change your whole life. But one choice is proof that change is possible, and it makes the next choice easier and the one after that. That's how new habits and mindsets are built. Let's bring this into real life a little bit. So you've yelled at your kids and you feel super guilty. You may think, I've messed up, I'm an awful parent, I'll never be good enough for them. But you haven't ruined it. That moment you felt the guilt is the opportunity to change. You can apologize. You can model accountability. You can choose differently next time. That's where the feelings of guilt are to be used as fuel. We've mentioned many times how guilt and shame are a big part of recovery because it's a terrible feeling and means we need to change something. It doesn't mean we are those things. It's a signal to understand that we do have the power to change. Our brains are built to learn from feedback, and guilt and shame are actually part of that process. Okay, guilt says the action didn't line up with my values. Shame says, I don't like who I was in that moment. And both of these emotions sting. They should sting. That sting is the brain's way of telling you, pay attention, something needs to change. Think about touching a hot stove. The pain makes you pull your hand back. Without that feedback, you'd leave your hand there and just burn yourself. Guilt and shame work the same way. They're emotional pain signals designed to get us moving in a different direction. And in recovery, that's often what pushes people to take the first step, to admit something isn't working, to apologize, to ask for help. Without that discomfort, there's no motivation to walk a new path. The problem isn't guilt or shame. The problem is when we get stuck in them and never move into action. That's where the power of choosing comes in. It's the bridge that turns guilt and shame into growth. Let's say you set a boundary and someone crossed it. You might feel weak or incapable for letting it slide, or maybe you feel stupid, but it's not failing, and it doesn't mean you can't reinforce the standard again. You learned a lesson from it, and what you do next is what's important. You get to practice choosing again. You can always set the boundary again. Choosing again takes the power away from the shame. Shame says you failed, and that means you're unworthy. And growth says you slipped, but you can still stand back up. You can still make different choices. Every single person you admire, whether it's a parent who inspires you, a leader you follow, an influencer, whatever, they got where they are by choosing again, not by being perfect, not by never falling short, by making the next choice over and over again until those choices stacked up into a new reality. That's why choosing again is one of the most powerful forms of self-respect. It says, I believe in my future more than I believe in my past. So let's go through some practical tools to help you through this. First, shrink the focus to one choice. Don't spiral into, I'll never get it right. Just ask, what's my next choice? For example, maybe you skipped your morning workout. Instead of beating yourself up and throwing the whole day away, ask, all right, what's my next choice? What can I do? That could mean taking a 10-minute walk on your lunch break or stretching before bed. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be forward. It has to align with your values and your goals. Another example, maybe your partner lied to you again. And the spiral will sound like, why do I keep believing them? I will never learn. But instead of going there, pull it back and ask, what's my next choice? Maybe it's deciding not to engage in the argument right now. Maybe it's choosing to write down the behavior so you have clarity later instead of letting them talk you out of what you saw. Maybe it's deciding to put your energy into something that nourishes you instead of pouring it into changing their behavior. Whatever choice that you make doesn't change their behavior, but it changes how you show up for yourself in the moment. And that's the important shift. Another tool you can do is label it. Label the trail. Like when you notice yourself walking an old path, the yelling, maybe lack of movement, avoiding, whatever it is that you're doing that you know doesn't align with your values. Pause and literally say to yourself, that's the old trail. And then ask, what would the new trail look like? Here's some examples. The old trail would be beating yourself up after you make a mistake. The new trail can say, well, that didn't go how I wanted, but I can choose differently next time. Old trail might be automatically saying yes to every request at work or from family when you know that you don't have the capacity to do that. The new trail would pause and you ask, okay, do I really have the capacity for this before agreeing to it? Old trail, believing your partner's excuses after they've broken the same promise over and over again. Your new trail would be reminding yourself, that's a pattern. I will trust actions and not words. Old trail, replaying a criticism in your head and spiraling into self-dismissal. New trail says, all right, that's the old trail. Then question it. Is this true 100% of the time? Like, ask if that criticism is actually true. Celebrate the reps. Every time you choose again, even in a small way, mark it down, write it out, put it in a journal, say it out loud, give yourself credit. Those reps matter. I say it out loud. Whenever I make a change or I do something different, I will celebrate that micro win because I know that it aligns with my values and it will help my future self. Another thing that you can do is separate worth from outcome. So you don't have to prove you're enough by making perfect choices. You already are. You already are enough. Choosing again isn't about fixing your value. It's about living into the person you want to become. Every new choice is a chance to build a different story. And the power to choose again is always in your hands. Today, tomorrow, and every day after that. So if you're listening to this thinking, I've blown it, I'm not enough, I want you to hear me clearly that you haven't. You're here, you're learning, and you can choose again, but it's up to you to take those steps. That choice, the one you make right now, could be the very one that changes everything. We have choices, y'all, and we get to decide how to push forward every day and not get stuck in the shame or guilt of things we've done. It's fuel and an opportunity to grow. Get excited that you have more control than you think, and it is all based on your choices. That's all I have for this week. Until next time, I'm Paige. Bye.